Right now, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker for today. Dr. Christy Jackson founded Query in 2002 and is an internationally recognized expert in NVivo. She focuses on the use of NVivo in a diverse array of health, education, public policy, and commercial research projects through her role as consultant, coach, analyst, and principal investigator. Dr. Jackson's research interests include conceptualizations of qualitative research transparency and the constantly changing spaces where qualitative researchers and technologies meet. She's also co-author of Sage Publications' best-selling book, Qualitative Data Analysis with NVivo. Welcome, Christy.
Great, thank you so much, Kevin. And before I start, I want to make sure all of you know that I'm happy to share slides or any of the documents and readings that I mention along the way. I will pull my contact information up again at the end, although if you just go to query.com, you will easily find ways to reach me and to get more information. In addition to these webinars, I also provide one-on-one help to doctoral students and others, both in person and virtually. I do on-site trainings for groups, help with grant writing, and also do trainings and retreats. And I wanted to make sure you know about a new format that I'm doing here in Colorado, hope to do elsewhere as well, that are click retreats, where instead of a standard classroom training for 2 days, you'll work in large group, small group, one-on-one sessions, and independent work in between. And if you're feeling extra motivated, you can stay a 4th day at no extra cost. And once again, more information about that is on the website. Those are going really well, and people are getting a lot out of them, and I'm having a great time running them. Okay, so let's move on to the presentation. Let me give you just a few caveats and descriptions of what I'm about to do here. So first of all, instead of fitting NVivo into your syllabus and figuring out a place where it can go while it's competing with other things, I'm trying to help you sort through how it can support your syllabus. I will be leaving some of the technical issues to Kevin and the other good folks at QSR, but this is really about taking some of the lessons you want to get across and leveraging some tools in NVivo to help demonstrate them or show them, so it feels like it's doing less to compete with time. Now, certainly the more familiar you are with NVivo, the more of these activities you'll be able to accomplish, but I tried to structure this so that even if you're new, you should be able to manage 1 or 2 of the first 4 activities that I'll show you, and you can always save the others for next semester as you learn more about the software. I've selected topics that are often part of qualitative methods classes based on a lot of syllabuses that I've looked at, but this certainly isn't exhaustive. So if this doesn't match your syllabus, you shouldn't be surprised because there's so much diversity, and I don't want you to change your syllabus unless you think there's something here that would be a nice addition. So don't use this as a gold standard and trust your own knowledge and your priorities for how you want to work with students. And we can talk more about this during discussion if it doesn't match your syllabus and there are things you want to leverage. Just so you're aware, some of the examples I will be presenting are contrasting, like coding versus writing, because that can be an interesting technique for showing students a range of things. And other examples, I'm just going to show a way of diving into a question or an issue in qualitative methods and see how it plays out. So these are just 2 tactics, again, among many. And you might also choose a different order of how I present them or how you want to scaffold the instruction. So just remember that I'm trying to get your brain going, but that I'm not trying to provide a template or a cookie cutter approach. Things like reflexivity will be different if you're doing program evaluation research versus like critical race theory as a focus of the class. And some of those may also be related to your values as a teacher. Okay, so if I say something that makes you wince, I encourage you to use that as a counterexample to how you think research should be done and taught. I would encourage you not to be dismissive of the software itself, but more of an approach that I might take that you might not. Within each of the 13 lessons, I'm going to provide class activities and questions. Once again, they're not exhaustive. So during discussion, I'd love to hear your ideas, what reading materials you might include, and again, this is just a jumping off point, so don't be afraid to play with it. Finally, when we get done, if there are aspects of your syllabus that you want to augment with NVivo and I didn't touch on them, please feel free to reach out to me. Okay, so now just a quick overview. I am going to give you 3 sections of these 13 activities. I'll begin with a starting point, or what I think of as some of the more basics, and we will do 4 activities around those. They rely a little bit more on qualitative methods than technology, so you can sort of forefront the methodological issues. I'll do 4 more that let you move ahead to some more complex tools and specializations in the software, and then we'll think more towards nearing conclusion, things that students might do as they're wrapping up a project, and you might need to know a little bit more about the software and experiment with it more to develop your own examples. Each of these sections of examples has goals or a focus of the activity that I'll go through, the prep work that you might do as an instructor, activities that the students might engage in, and then questions that would help launch ideas for papers or discussions or presentations in class, and really it's up to you. So I don't want to spend too much time on these because we'll go through them in more detail here momentarily. I'm going to get out of the PowerPoint here and then into the software. But here are some basic activities that we'll go through. What is qualitative data? Is it found or constructed? Thinking about qualitative data, coding versus writing. What is reflexivity and how do researchers account for it? Coding, reasoning, interpreting, and understanding. Open coding versus text mining, subgroups or sets and why we create the groupings that we do, the literature review in NVivo, ethics and qualitative research, reporting qualitative data, figuring out what to say about the logical chain of connections. And then I positioned this issue of where does the software fit as number 10. Some people like to put that first, but I find once students play with the tools, they're better able to dive into this discussion of what role the software has in the process and how it might influence the process. Quantifying qualitative data, closeness and distance to data, and then how to communicate findings or persuade others about what you've uncovered. All right, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and exit out of my PowerPoint, and let's dive into NVivo. What I've done is I've created a memo in my project here. So this is the inside of a database, and once again, it has the 3 sections that I'm going to cover and the elements in each activity. Some of you may be familiar with NVivo, and for some of you this may be a little bit new, so I just want to orient you briefly to the screen before I start through these activities. First of all, if you've used Outlook before, you'll find kind of a similar layout. Here on the left-hand side of my screen, I have several buttons that I can go to. So if I go to Sources and choose Interviews, this list of interviews appears just to the right. I've also imported things like literature, right? So if I go to that folder, I end up seeing that literature. And to open anything, all you have to do is double click on it. Now I'm skipping the creating a project and importing data because you'll find lots of primers on how to do that with videos and other help files. The data really is quite easy to get in, and you can get a lot of different data types in, video, audio, photos, that kind of thing. Now I'm in the sample project. I'm not going to do a lot to explain this data because I really want to just get into some examples of these tools. But what I want you to see is that in my list of interviews here, I actually have 3 different kinds of data for Ken. I have a photograph and a transcript and a video, and that's going to lead me into my first little lesson here. So let's open Ken's photo. That's just an image of him. There's his transcript. And then here's actually a video of Ken. And part of the reason I separated this data out, you actually can include a transcript with the video, so it would show alongside here, is that the goal of this first activity is to get students talking about what is qualitative data, and during collection, is it found or is it constructed? One great way to do that is to take some data but present it in different formats. So as soon as we ask questions, right, about the research, we start influencing what we see. And as we write about or handle data, we start constructing our understandings. And sometimes when students see these different formats of data, the photo or the transcript or the video, they realize that they're understanding different things about the very same moment. So here is what I would recommend for this activity. The prep time would be to take about a 5-minute video and turn it into an audio tape and distribute that to students so they can just hear it, and maybe with one screenshot of the video, like that picture of Ken. Then you'd have students look at the screenshot or the photo and transcribe the audio and develop research questions, what they're hearing, what interests them. Then to import the transcript and code it, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second, and import the video and code clips from the video. Really, coding the transcript and the video are both pretty easy as basic tasks. I would encourage you to have them play the video without the sound and see what they see, comparing to what they heard in the audio tape. And then I have questions here that could help facilitate a conversation or a paper they might write. So what did they notice about the similarities and differences in attending to picture, text, audio, or video data? Why would they use these different forms or not use them? When collecting, do students believe they're finding data or constructing it, and explain? You might have some articles or literature that they read to help them think through that. And how can we challenge first impressions of the data? In part, I put that in because having these different media types to look at helps think about the data in different ways and fight those first impressions. Now, code, I'll just show you quickly, really easy. NVivo calls these nodes. I have several nodes that are here on the screen, but you can create any ones you want. Here in this transcript, as Ken is talking, he says that he has an uncle who bought a cabin here, and that's how he started spending time here. So I'm going to just right-click and create a new node called Family in the area. That just popped into alphabetical order. So to code it, all you have to do is highlight text and drag it to the node. I'll double-click on this node. Once again, that's the same thing as a code, so you can see it. And there's the text that I just coded to that node. Now the video, if I go back to Ken's video, you can actually, while you play this video, which I'll play briefly, okay, so you saw as he was talking that this playhead moved across the screen at the top, and eventually what you're able to do is select a range of the video, just like I selected text, and you can code that to any node that you might have as well, like family in the area. I'll code it to the same place. So when I open up this node again, it tells me the timestamp of what I coded here, and way on the right-hand side of my screen, I have a tab that shows me I can jump to the video and once again just play that clip. Okay, so bringing in this data, these different media types, and coding them is actually remarkably simple. The hard part is thinking through why you're doing it, what's the data, how are you starting to see the data because of these different formats. So I think this is a great introductory activity that really doesn't require that much expertise in the software and really requires more careful facilitation of what students are seeing and how they're processing it. Okay, so there's the first one. Now, just so you know, I will start going faster with some of these, partly because you're getting familiar with the software as I'm demonstrating them. But before each one, I will do a little demonstration with you so you know what I'm about to do on the screen. So this next topic is about thinking about qualitative data and the difference between coding and writing. And I'm going to come back to this one several times. So first what I'll do is go to my sources and I am opening one of my interviewees whose name is Thomas. And when I open Thomas, I can see in the first section, this is one of my favorite transcripts in the sample data. He says, I'm not a downeaster. That's the area that they're living in. He says, I'm not a downeaster by generation. He wasn't born there by any sense. I'm a dingbatter. And because I'm a sociologist, I often look at terms for outsiders and find them fascinating. So he's using dingbatter to refer to himself as an outsider, and that's a local term. So once again, let's just review coding quickly. I can create a new node and call it outsider. And I can highlight as much or as little as I want. How about I grab the first part of this paragraph and then drag it over to outsider. Once again, if I open up outsider by double-clicking on it, I see the data that's in it. You'll see tabs keep stacking at the top here of what I've opened. So let me just close outsider. Now, one thing we might do is code, and coding is often part of what comes up in a qualitative methods class. But one of my favorite tools in NVivo is that instead of coding, you can also write and link, and I'm going to show you that tool real quickly. If I go back on my left-hand side of my screen to sources, and instead of the interviews folder where I have all of my internal data, I go to my memos folder, and there are already several memos in here, but I can create a new one, and I'll call it interpretations. So what's just opened on the right-hand side of my screen is a brand new huge empty window. Remember, I still have Thomas open as well. What I can do in that interpretations window is not just write, but I can link to the very text that gave me ideas. One of the things I noticed when I saw this is that Thomas is referring to himself as a dingbatter, so he's being a little playful with how he is co-opting what should be a negative term, and he's using it on himself. And that's similar to what happened with the terms queer or with Obamacare, terms that are initially designed to be derogatory but then get co-opted and they're attempted to be used in a positive way. So that's something that I wouldn't code for. I'd want to write about it and link to it. All I have to do is copy this text. I did that with a simple right click. And then I'm going to my interpretations memo and I can say, I wonder if the term dingbatter is getting co-opted as a positive term. And really, I should write more than this, but I'm only going to write that little bit so we can keep going. Now remember, the quote is on my clipboard. Instead of pasting it underneath, I'm going to highlight a piece of what I wrote, and there's an option we can use that's instead of paste, it's called paste as a see also link. So let me show you why this is one of my favorite tools. What it did is it created a pink highlight here that shows me I have something linked to it. And if I double click on this link at the bottom of my screen, even if Thomas was closed, so I'm going to close Thomas to prove this to you. So Thomas is no longer open, but he's here at this link. If I double click on it, it opens and goes right to that spot in the data. Finally, my last favorite thing about this tool is that if I go back to the memo and export it, so I'm right-clicking and exporting, I'll have it open instantly so you can see it. Look what it does. It's going to open up Microsoft Word. And now I have, in addition to the idea that I wrote, I've got a little footnote that has a link, a direct link to the exact quote at the bottom of the screen. So you can have a lot of things written and quotes supporting it just by using memos and links in the database. Now, this notion of memoing and linking is really different than coding. It's another great way to get students to think about what they're doing in the software and what they're doing when they're handling data. So for this activity, the prep would be to distribute a transcript like the one in Thomas I was just in, to have students open it in NVivo and start coding, and maybe write a link about dingbatter, just like I did. and then to ask them what examples they have from their research, because they might be handling some data or you might have some samples, that would be better suited for coding versus memoing and linking, right? Just different ways to think about the data. All right, so there's those questions there. Now, once again, I just want to warn you, I'm going to speed up a little bit, and we might not get through all of these, but we'll get through a few that will give you some examples. So the next thing I wanted to show you really briefly is that there's another tool that allows you to annotate or create a comment in Microsoft Word. So here I'm back in Thomas again, and I've highlighted Dingbatter. I can also highlight any other text, but I'll stay with Dingbatter, and I can go to Links, Annotation, New, where I'm writing a little comment. Dingbatter is a term for outsiders, right? It's just a little clarifier. Okay, so now that you know coding and memoing and linking and annotating here, another class activity could be some reading and discussion about reflexivity and exploring the differences and dimensions of reflexivity and how to produce them in NVivo, because memos and links provide a great way to be reflexive and to think about one's role in the field. You might have a reading that you give them about it, or several readings, and you might show them how to create a memo and write about different understandings of reflexivity actually in that memo. And then here's some questions about reflexivity from different fields, like the difference between reflexivity and program evaluation or critical race theory, that they could then use. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next one. And this one actually doesn't require me to show you anything in the software because we've already done quite a bit. So this fourth one is about coding, reasoning, interpreting, and understanding data. So I'd encourage you to give them a reading or discussion on how we understand data. I have more detail here than I need to, but again, I'm happy to provide this list to you after the session. And this just helps get people thinking about deductive coding from the top down, inductive coding from the bottom up, abductive coding, where you play around with the data to find best fits while you're working with it. And then I really like Johnny Saldana's retroductive coding, which he adds to this list in his book on thinking qualitatively. And that's looking back and describing what you did. So looking at the product and then describing the process you used to get there. Plus there's alternatives to that kind of reasoning. Artistic, an ethic of caring, things like autoethnography, where you're using innovative, transformative, or therapeutic ways of understanding data. So these are all very different approaches, and they would probably direct students to code in different ways. Okay, and now that you know the simplicity of coding, and you can create hierarchies of codes, you can spend a lot of time talking about these ways of getting to those codes. All right, so I'm going to move on to the next one, and I'll probably just do about 2 more here. We won't get through the whole list. Open coding versus text mining. So in NVivo, some of you may know you can do text mining. I can run really quickly here. I'll go to queries, and I'll do a new query that's a word frequency. Really easy to run these. And in fact, I don't need to explain much of this on the screen. I'll just go ahead and run it with the run button. Any of these words that came up, in addition to knowing how many times they came up, I can actually drill into any of these to look more closely. So the issue of water in this coastal community is talked about a lot. If I double click on it, it takes me to the data. And once it opens all the examples of water, I can also get more context around any of the mentions if I want to, and I can code all this directly to any codes or any nodes. So that's a great way to start discussing the difference between text mining for keywords and context versus coding with the data open and doing the interpretive work. And you may also know way over on the right-hand side of my screen, when I'm in the output of these queries, I can generate things like word clouds to look at the data. All right, so I I think I want to try to do 2 more. Let me just pick here quickly from the ones I want to show you. I'm going to do the next one on my list. So the next one on my list, let me go back to that memo where I have all these in a nice list of class activities. Okay, so there's the open coding versus text mining activity. Then the next one is about subgroups. So I would encourage you to have them read something like what are communities of practice and how do we define cultures and subcultures, or how do we use scales and scores to put people in groups, because these are all different ways that we attempt to look at subpopulations. So thinking through why we group things the way we do is a really important reflexive activity. The nice thing in NVivo is that once I go to my sources and to my interviews, I can choose any of these folks and instantly put them into a set. What I'm doing right now, really quickly, is just grabbing 4 of the women, and these icons look different because some of them are transcripts, some of them are video. So I'm being consistent and just selecting transcripts to make it a little easier for you to follow. And I can instantly create those as a set, and I can create them as a set of women. Let me show you where those live. They live in collections in the software. So now I have a set among my other sets for the women in the project. And when I click on it, it shows me a shortcut link to those. Well, remember a moment ago when I was in this word frequency query and I had a list of words? Now, instead of looking at these in context, I can choose to look just in my set of women. Right, so there's the women. I can run this again, and really, though queries can get complicated, learning the word frequency query and learning how to create a set and then scoping this query just to that subgroup is pretty easy. Right? So that's another way to both talk about what are groups, how do we identify subgroups in a study, and this query is just one way of looking at those subgroups. Okay, let me do one more. I'm going to pick my favorite here from my list. Let's talk about ethics. Okay, so first, in terms of ethics, one of the things that will come up as I'm moving through my different tabs here is, remember when I started, I had Ken's photo and Ken's transcript and Ken's video? Because we looked at this earlier, it's a great time to stop and reflect on what does it mean to protect participants with these different kinds of data? What do the participants need to know ahead of time about how this data will be used or how it might be presented? So just the data type, the naming of the files, those are some standard things to think about in ethics. And also, just as a little detail in NVivo, you can also password protect projects to create some protection around the entire database. So I'm going to File from the main menu and then Project Properties. And that opens up a window with lots of options, and one of those options is to change the passwords. So understanding fundamental ethical principles, whether you're using something like the Belmont report versus an ethic of caring, and how this plays out in NVivo can be a really helpful way for students to visualize what it means to protect participants and to think through honorably handling that data. Okay, so that activity was number 8. I'm going to skip one. So that was ethics. I recommend having them read something on ethics and ethical dilemmas based on what they know about NVivo, what needs to be protected in the database, and how could it be protected, and how might the ethical dilemma be handled inside NVivo. I actually have, for my dissertation, where I used some projects from NVivo that doctoral students were working on, I have, I think, a nice example of an ethical dilemma that comes up along the way and how it was handled. So if anybody wants to see that section of the dissertation, I'm happy to share it with you. I use it a lot in my trainings to show people some of the unexpected ethical issues. So I know that we build this as a session where I go through 13 different activities, thinking that you might even be able to pull one for each week during a semester of a class. I want to make sure I'm pausing and just giving you a sense of this, and we can talk more about examples you might want to see. And once again, I'm happy to share the other ideas and examples with you. I'd love feedback. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts about things you want to demonstrate in your class, how you want to loop in NVivo, or readings that you might think of pairing with any of these activities. So Kevin, with that, I think it's probably a good idea for me to hand it back to you rather than just continuing to march through all these examples. And if there are other examples that come up, let me just go to the end here. If there are other examples that come up as we're talking that are related to any of these, I'm happy to go through those, right, to talk through any of these or to go back with those examples. So I'm just going to leave that on my screen, my contact information and some of the activities.
Thank you, Christy.